What's up, guys? I hope you're staying safe and healthy. In this one, we're going over how to draw chicken with the 3-layered method. I'm sorry, there's not a lot of videos out there on how to draw a damn chicken. So I figured, you know what? I'm gonna make one. And we did. So as always, I'm going to be taking you step by step through how we convey different textures. We're gonna be outlining the shape. We're gonna be framing the 3-dimensional form. We're gonna be using soft, medium, and hard charcoals. We're gonna be using brushwork, eraser work, all of the good stuff. I try not to list stuff, but so let's draw a chicken. Okay, so to start, we're going to be using a graphite pencil. We're also going to be using an Ahuhu eraser, a Pentel Click eraser, and a Mono Zero eraser. We're also going to be using a number 3, a number 1, and a 3/16 smudger. And of course, we're going to be using our soft, medium, and hard rated charcoal pencils. Yes. We're also going to be using a sandpaper strip, our tone check paper for checking our tones before we lay them down onto the paper, and last but not least, the brush. Okay, so the first step with any drawing is, of course, identifying the basic shape of our reference image. And in this instance, we are going to draw out the outline of the comb of this chicken. And the big part here when you're drawing out your basic shape is just to remember to go light if you mess up or if your proportions are not where you want them to be. Do not worry about that. That's one of the reasons why we rock 3 different types of erasers, because if we need to erase and go at it again and give it another go, we can do that. That's totally within our power to do. But now here we're just gonna draw out the basic shape of the wattles of this chicken. And we're gonna solidify the bottom half of the beak here. And then that other wattle. There we are. And I actually don't like how wide that beak is, so I'm gonna draw out some more lines. And then here, I'm gonna take my Mono Zero eraser and I'm just gonna erase it. And this is what I mean, and this is one of the reasons why I want to show you guys this, because if you do make mistakes, just know that we all do. You know, even artists such as myself, I make mistakes on every single drawing that I do. So don't think that you have to nail it right out of the gate. You don't have to. And then here what I'm doing is I'm just looking at my reference image, and you see how there's a different variation in the height of the feathers on the face of this chicken. And so I'm just kind of identifying where those are at, those different heights, and I'm just outlining the eye here. And remember, this is just basically a framework for our charcoal to follow. And the big thing when you're drawing a chicken is to just identify a lot of feathers. One of the things you'll find when it comes to the plumage of these birds is that they tend to be in groups. They tend to lay together in groups on top of each other. And so if you can identify that when you're setting your drawing up and doing the outline, you'll be better for it. And then here, actually, I don't like the way this eye is looking, so I'm just going to hit it real quick with my Mono Zero eraser. And I'm going to start over. And we can do that. That isn't a problem at all. Here, I'm just going to see if I can get this a little bit closer to what the reference image is like. And there we are. I'm happier with that. Okay. So now what we're going to do is we are going to frame our our form. Now, in all drawings, this is one of the hardest things to convey, and that is that third dimension, because a drawing, as you heard me say in previous videos, is always only ever going to be in two-dimensional space. And it's our job as the artist to make sure that we are able to convey that third dimension with our drawing and with our charcoal skills. And so this is a way that I have found, I call this framing my form. And when you look at the reference image, there's form in the wattles, there is definite form in the beak of this bird, and there is definite form in the comb of this chicken as well. And so these are focal points within this piece that we want to make sure that we speak to. And so this framework is light, and it'll disappear underneath the charcoal when the time comes to throw that charcoal down. And when it comes to the plumage, don't worry about framing your three-dimensional form. I'm going to show you how to use some brush work and some eraser techniques to convey that form. And there we are. So now, of course, we are ready for charcoal. So I'm going to take my tone check paper. Here I've taken my sandpaper strip and I've grinded on some soft and some medium grade charcoal. And of course, I want to move quickly, so I'm going to just load up my size 6 brush here. I'm going to do a little tone check, make sure it's the proper tone that I want. And you might remember from our value video that a darker tone will convey a lower value onto the paper, and a lighter tone will convey a higher value onto the paper. So just keep that in mind. But here what we're doing is, by loading up the brush and referring to our reference image before we lay that charcoal down onto the paper, we can start to see where those lower values are going to be in the comb of this chicken. And thus we want to hit those first, because as we continue to hit the paper with our brush, what's going to happen is that brush is going to become less and less loaded with charcoal, and as a consequence to that, our value will go from being a very low value initially to a higher and higher value. So keep that in mind, and that this is one of the reasons why I always say make sure that you tackle your lower values first, and the higher values will take care of themselves. Here, as you can see, there's a darker value there, and bear in mind, keep in mind that underlying form. So here I'm going to change my direction. I'm going to go vertical instead of horizontal with how I pull the brush across the paper. And also be aware that when it comes to this step, hit the paper with your brush extremely lightly. We want the charcoal in this step to be resting on top of the paper. This, of course, is a soft charcoal. And one of the reasons why we use a soft charcoal for initial layering as opposed to medium and hard charcoals is because a soft charcoal has little to no binder in it from the manufacturing process, and because of that, the charcoal tends to grade together very nicely. And so we can blend, and when it comes to retrieving tones with our erasers, it makes it much easier to do, because we're not fighting that binder. Binder tends to stick to the paper, where pure charcoal will just lift very nicely. Here I'm just taking my monozer eraser and I'm just cleaning up some of the edges here. Charcoal has a tendency to run away from you if you let it. So we want to make sure that we're doing our due diligence here and keeping our paper as clean as possible. Here, let's clean this up. And also be aware, in this step is where you can really solidify the basic shape of your drawing as well. And this is one of the reasons why I love the 3-layered method, is because it gives you multiple chances to really streamline your drawing and make it what you want it to be. So now I'm going to take my smudger here. I'm going to load it up. I'm going to check my tone, make sure I have a nice low value. And the big difference with smudgers as compared to brushes, as you can see, is that I have a lot more control with my smudgers, and because of that, I'm able to really put that charcoal exactly where I want it to be. Where with the brush, you're kind of able to do that, but for the most part, your charcoal's kind of going all over the place. But as you can see here with the smudger, we have a ton of control. And here's a little technique. You can more or less dab the tip of the smudger, because if you actually look at the comb of the chicken in the reference image, we have almost like a cactus type of texture. A lot of bumps, a lot of high points, a lot of low points, and of course a huge array of value from high values to low values in between it all. And so with the smudger, as you can see, I'm kind of pulling and pushing the charcoal into place in certain areas. One of the reasons why I'm doing this is because I'm solidifying that underlying form. Now, bear in mind, this is a layering process. So one of the things I'm going to do after I'm done kind of solidifying that underlying form as far as my values are concerned with my smudger is I'm going to be going in with an eraser, and I'm going to be retrieving a lot of my higher values, and really that's going to speak to that texture that we want to get on this comb of this chicken. But as you can see with the smudger, a ton of control, and I'm really able to go in and solidify that form, where I wouldn't really be able to do this with the brush. So now, power tool time, the Ahuhu battery operated eraser. Now, if you don't have one of these, I definitely recommend getting one, especially when it comes to complex textures like the one that we're working with here. Just be very careful with the Ahuhu eraser. What I'm doing is I'm taking the eraser and I'm barely touching the paper, and I'm more or less skipping across the paper. But at the same time, the thing with this, because it's a power tool eraser, it has a tendency to kind of take off running on you if you let it, so just be aware of that. One of the things with this step that I want you to be aware of is, if you look at the reference image, you'll notice that on the top parts of the chicken's cone, we have higher values, and then because of the light source and the way the light is hitting this chicken, as we go farther down, those high values gradually get lower and lower. And so because of that, what we want to do is we want to make sure that we're conveying that on the paper. We want to make sure that the texture that we are putting down, those higher values that we're retrieving with our eraser, we want to make sure that we're running and taking those higher values away on the top parts of the chicken's cone. And you'll see why after we start to take some medium charcoal and we really start to go in and kind of more or less highlight all of the eraser work that we're putting down now. But this is just to convey texture. That's what this step is all about. And bear in mind, I do have this part of the video sped up significantly. The more time you take with your drawings, the more accurate they will be to your reference image. Another thing to note about the Ahuhu eraser is that the tip spins clockwise, so meaning that it spins from left to right. So when you're hitting the paper, come in from right to left. And that way, when you touch the paper, the eraser head won't skip, because if you come down the same way that the eraser tip is turning, it'll have a tendency to try to run away from you and it'll skip across the paper. So just be aware of that. I've had that happen to me like a whole bunch of times. So. But we can't learn unless we're making mistakes, right? But the big thing here is just really focus on where those higher values are on the chicken's comb. Make sure that wherever the higher values are in the reference image, that's where you're spending the majority of your time. Okay, so now we're going to take a medium charcoal. And what we're doing is we're going to go in and essentially we are going to stand our medium charcoal pencil up on end. And we are going to be highlighting all of the high values that we just laid down with our Ohuhu eraser. So I don't know if you can really see what I'm doing, but I'm going in small little figure eights, and I'm stopping and pushing, and then I'm pulling, and my pressure control is varying constantly. Let's see if you can see this. See that? That's kind of what I'm doing. I'm just going around in little zigzags, little figure eights, little swirls, and all the while that I'm doing that, here, let's see, I'll make these a little bigger, see if you can really see. But that's what I'm doing. And the big thing here is the secret to this technique that I'm doing is constant change up of my pressure control. When I'm doing my little swirlies, I'll be pushing hard for a second, and then I'll relieve my pressure, and then I'll push hard for a second, and then I'll relieve my pressure. And what this does is this just speaks to that gritty sandpapery look. Like if you look at the reference image, that's kind of the way it is. You look at that comb of that chicken, and there's dark spots here, and there's lighter spots there, and as you can see, as we're progressing with this texture, that underlying form that we laid down with the brush, and then we really solidified it with the smudger work, even though this texture is really starting to pop, and we've really got a good variation as far as our dark values to our light values, the whole time that we're conveying that, we're not losing that underlying form. And this is one of the reasons why the 3-layered method really works in the wake of charcoal drawing as far as an approach is concerned, is because we're taking care of the form first, and then we add texture on top of the form. And the cool thing about that is that gives us a really realistic look, while at the same time making sure that we're accentuating the value scale, right? That's a thing that I'm a big proponent of, and that you should be aware of as a young artist, because being able to make sure that you have complete black to complete white and all of your other tones and values in between those 2 points in your drawings is only going to help you, and it's really going to make your drawings pop in the wake of just having a lot of value and jumping off the paper for your viewer. So just keep that in mind. But this is one of the reasons why this technique is proven, and it does work very well. The trick is just knowing what does that approach look like. So just keep that in mind. The big thing here is not to put too much detail on top of the combs, where those higher values are. There we go. And yeah, just put little bits and pieces of it here, little bits and pieces of it there, and all of a sudden it'll really start to come together for you. And don't be fooled, guys. This part of the drawing took me probably an hour, maybe a little more, just in and of itself. Remember what I said before, just go slow and take your time, and that texture will really come out, and it'll jump off the paper for you. There we go. And then here I'm just, see how I'm just running it, little dot, and then I move, and then a couple more dots, and then I move. I don't want those dots to be so close together on the outline of the comb that it looks like a line, because that's not the way the reference image looks. So just keep that in mind. I'm just, see, check this out. I'm just standing up, a little heavy here, and then I move up, little dot, little heavy here, little dot. And that's literally all you have to do. I'll put like a little defined line here. There we go. more implied. It has a very, very light line weight. Okay. So now it's more smudger work. Good old smudger work. So here what I'm doing is I'm going to take my smudger and I'm just going to pull it very lightly. Barely touch the paper with this process. And what this is going to do is, this is just like with the comb. When it comes to the plumage of most birds, it's very much a layering process, just like what we did with the comb. And what we're doing is we're taking this smudger, we're laying it on its side, and we're just lightly pulling here and there. Meanwhile, we're sticking true to how that plumage flows, right? So if we have a spot like here on the back side where the plumage is a little longer, we want our pulls to be longer. If the plumage is a little shorter, like it is up here around the eye in the face of this chicken, then we want our pulls to be shorter. Here we're actually going to size down. I'm going to grab my 3/16. Load up. There we go. Make sure that is the tone that I want. And this is going to give me some nice mid-tones, mid to low tones. There we go. Just nice little short throws. That's the big thing when it comes to plumage. And do not be afraid to leave plenty of white space. That's the big thing that a lot of young artists are worried about, is they think they have to throw charcoal absolutely everywhere, and they do not have to. Remember how I always talk about retrieving lighter values? Well, there's also a technique where you save lighter values, and that's basically where you don't put any charcoal down on that specific area of your drawing. Okay, so now I'm just going to take my brush and just very lightly just hit this. Remember, most of the time when it comes to brush work, at any step of your drawing, you're going to just barely touch the paper. The brush is a very powerful tool, and it does all the work for you. And then here's another cool technique. If you want to go in and you want to soften up any areas in the comb of your chicken, you can do that. Just very lightly. Just what I'm doing is I'm more or less pushing on the paper in certain areas, and I'm very, very lightly, and I have very, very light pressure control with my brush when I do this, because I don't want to compromise the integrity of all that texture that we just laid down. So now here I'm just going to load up the brush, and this is another technique that you can use when it comes to the feathers, plumage of this bird. You can go ahead and you can just load up your brush in certain areas, and what this does is this gives your feathers kind of a softer look. And remember how before I was talking about how feathers on chickens they kind of group up, and then you have like literally groups of feathers laying on top of other groups of feathers? Well, this technique will really help you sell that look to the viewer's eye. And if it looks like there's a lot of charcoal kind of everywhere, don't worry about that, because now we're going to go in with our Mono Zero eraser. And much like what we did with our Ohuhu eraser when it comes to the chicken's comb, how we went in and retrieved a lot of our higher values, that's exactly what we're doing here with the Mono Zero eraser. Principle's the same. Slight difference in actual technique, because rather than using the Ohuhu, we're using the Mono Zero eraser, and this is a normal. This is actually a detail eraser, but it's not battery powered. You are the battery. So the cool thing about this is you can use pressure control, much like when you have a charcoal pencil in your hand. You do the same thing with your Mono Zero eraser. I'm just going through, and I am just trying to get that texture, just trying to convey that texture in the feathers. And the big secret to this part of this technique is making sure that you are pulling your Mono Zero eraser in the same direction that the feathers are flowing. That's the big thing. If you can achieve that, then you will accomplish a realistic look with your bird. So just keep that in mind. Okay, that's looking good. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go in with our medium charcoal here. I think I want to go ahead and solidify this eye. So I'm just going to go in and put a nice defined line here. As far as the line quality goes with this, I just want to make sure that this is fairly thick, but not too thick. Somewhere in the middle. But I do want to make sure that it has a heavy line weight, but a mid to thinner line quality. And here I'm just going to draw out the center of the eye here, and I'm just going to pack it in. And one of the reasons why I'm using a medium charcoal versus a hard charcoal for this step is because the medium has a little less binder in it than the hard charcoal does, and thus it throws a darker, a richer black, and that's what we want. But now here I don't like this, so I'm just going to clean this up a little bit in the eye. There we go. Get that graphite out of there. So now I'm going to take my 3/16 smudger because it's the smallest one that I have. I need to have pinpoint accuracy when it comes to eyes. Remember what I always say about eyes: get in and then get out. You can overwork an eye very easily, and that's not what we're trying to do. So much of the time, the eyes in any drawing are paramount. They're a focal point of any animal. And because of that, your viewer is going to be drawn right to the eye when they look at it. So we want to make sure that we nail that eye. But here the 3/16 smudger is allowing me to get that form and that roundness of the eye. The big thing with this step is just, as you can see in the reference image, just make sure between the center of the eye and the outside of the eye that there's that whiteness, because that will sell that rounded look. That'll really make it look rounded, and that's what we want. We don't want an eye that looks flat. We want an eye that looks rounded. So now I'm just going to go in here with my hard charcoal. I'm going to solidify this eye. There we are. And then it looks like there's a little bit of form right there. I'll just lay that down. If this part of it looks gritty, don't worry about that, because I'm going to go in with a smudger here. I'm just going to soften this up. There we are. That looks better. Okay. Just going to go ahead and beef up this line weight a little bit. There we go. Just get that look that I want. There we are. Okay. Now if you look, there's a reflection. So I'm going to take this, and what I did is I saved that higher value. And now what I'm doing is I'm outlining that higher value versus going in and retrieving that higher value. Now I'm just going to take my smudger. I'm just going to soften this up. Remember, when it comes to eyes are very soft in nature. So we want to make sure that we convey that with our smudger work. Like I said, an eye can make or break you sometimes. There we are. That looks nice. So here what I'm doing is I'm taking a hard charcoal. And one of the reasons why I'm using a hard charcoal for this detail work around the eye is because the hard charcoal has the most amount of binder in it. And because of that, if you remember back to our value video, hard charcoals throw the lightest tone of charcoal, and thus some of the highest values, next to white. And so because of that, hard charcoals not only will your tips not break, which is wonderful when you are highlighting plumage and feathers on birds, but hard charcoal is the one that you want to use for detail work when it comes to feathers. As you can see, my tip is not breaking off at all. One of the things you will want to be careful of when it comes to this step is you want to make sure that the tip of your hard charcoal pencil is sharp. Remember, when it comes to feathers and highlighting them with hard charcoal, the sharper your tip, the better. So now what we're going to do is we're going to switch over to our 3/16, and this is just another layer of charcoal. This is where we are conveying our lower values, our lower to mid level values in our drawing. And as you can see, because we've already gone through with our mono-zero eraser on that initial layer of charcoal and hit it, we do have those underlying layers of feathers already conveyed. And so what we're going to be doing is, just like we did with the initial layer of charcoal, after we go through with our size 3/16 smudger and lay out those lower to mid values, we are going to be going back with our eraser work, and we're going to be highlighting them and retrieving mid to high values, just like we did in that initial layer. So if something looks kind of dark, or if it doesn't look quite right, don't worry about that. Just understand that this is just yet another layer. And with most birds, especially chickens, you're going to find that you're going to be going back through and maybe doing 2 to 3, or sometimes maybe even 4 different layers like this, where you lay the charcoal down and then you hit it with your mono-zero eraser. The big difference between all of those different layers is the difference in value. Are you trying to convey your high values? Are you trying to convey your mid level values, or your your darkest, your lowest values? Then, as you can see, we're just going in with our mono-zero eraser, and we're just solidifying the texture of those super small feathers in the chicken's face. And with most birds, that's one of the things that you'll realize as you draw more and more birds, is that their feathers have different lengths, different weights. Like, for example, in this chicken, if you look at the reference image, the feathers around the eye are super small, but the feathers underneath the cheek where the neck starts are very big. They're completely different feathers. So your poles and your eraser work with, like, say, your mono-zero eraser, they're all going to be different lengths and different pressures. So just keep that in mind. So now here what I'm doing is I'm going through and I'm doing a little bit of detail work with my medium charcoal. And one of the reasons why we're trying to convey this detail work with medium charcoal is because medium charcoal does throw a lower value, because it has a little bit less binder in it from the manufacturing process. But be sparing with the medium charcoal when it comes to this step. You don't need to go overboard. Remember, you can add too much detail, and then all of a sudden your drawing doesn't look so realistic. It looks more cartoony in nature. So just make sure that you keep that in mind. We just got some spots here, some spots there. Spots here. There we are. So now I've switched it up. I'm just going through, and I'm trying to solidify how all of those different feathers are flowing, especially these smaller ones. When it comes to feathers, one of the things that you'll find is that less is truly more. Like with most detail work, with charcoal, you can add way too much charcoal, and that's something that we want to be aware of. This is just a hard charcoal. I'm just going through, looks like there's a line here, a slight defined line. And then what this has done is this has effectively, if you look at the reference image, the cheek of the chicken has a bunch of smaller feathers that roll back behind its ear. And by laying that line down with the hard charcoal, what we've done is we've made it look like it's laying on top of the neck feathers. And that speaks true to our reference image. Remember how I said in the line video, sometimes you can convey form in a drawing with just simple line work, and this is a prime example of that. But when it comes to your hard charcoal and highlighting those feathers, as with as with anything, as with your eraser work or your brush work, pressure control is crucial. So just keep that in mind. Now here what I'm going to do is I'm going to solidify the beak of this bird. Looks like it kind of goes up like that around the nostril. And now I'm just going through doing any short pull lines to really give these feathers kind of their own look, kind of their own body, because even if you look at them, they're kind of laying on top of each other too. And bear in mind, guys, I am moving extremely quickly with this drawing. Most of my drawings that you see, I've spent anywhere from like 10 to 14 hours worth of actual chair time on them. But with these tutorials, because I'm kind of governed by time, I'm moving extremely quickly, and I'm not able to give these drawings the amount of time that I would like to really convey detail. But as long as you guys are comprehending the underlying principles of my approach, that's really the value in these videos, because you can take those and you can do whatever you want with them and apply them to your own drawings. So just keep that in mind. But then here, if you look at the reference image, there are some black feathers that are lying with the white feathers. And so this is kind of how we convey those. I'm just pulling up, I'm solidifying a line, and then I'm pulling down. And we'll be going in and hitting this with brushwork too, so if it looks gritty, don't worry about that. And then here I'm just gonna put a nice light defined line on the wattle of this chicken. And then I'll solidify it from where it comes off the beak and down and around. And also be aware that this is a hard charcoal. All right. So now I'm gonna take my brush and I'm just gonna hit these real quick. See how it makes them look nice and soft? That's what we want. And then here I'm just taking some charcoal and I'm running it along right where there's all those cheek feathers, and then I'm pulling down, up and then down. There we go. And that's really giving these feathers a nice soft look. And then also, if it looks a little bit too dark, don't worry about that. This is what we want at this step, because I'm going to be going in with a Mono Zero eraser, and I'm going to be retrieving all of those higher values that we want for the feathers, and really kind of bringing out that plumage of the chicken's neck feathers. But you can add as little or as much charcoal as you want. A key point to remember when it comes to this step is the more charcoal you lay down, the more your retrieved high values are going to pop, because everything that surrounds your highlights is going to be darker, and thus your highlights are going to look to the viewer's eyes as if they are holding a higher value. Just like this here, see? Just quick pulls, and all of a sudden we have plumage. It's all about knowing what you're going to do 3 steps from what you're doing. But the more you draw and the more you utilize this approach, it'll become like second nature to you. So if it's a little difficult right now, don't worry about that. Just practice, practice, practice. That's all you gotta do. So, and soon you'll be better than me. Here we're just pulling, just like that. Just real quick. You can get carried away with this step, but like I said before, I find that less is more. So, and you can go in with a medium charcoal, and you can run your charcoal along those high values. And remember, a high value and a dark value right next to each other. Remember in the value video how we talked about value relationships, right? That's what we're doing here. This is value relationships. This is a prime example of it. We're running that medium charcoal right next to those highlights that we just laid down with our Monozoa eraser, and it's really bringing out those feathers on the neck of this chicken. And that's what we want. We want to accentuate that value scale as much as possible. So now here I'm just gonna go ahead with my Monozoa eraser. I'm just gonna highlight this eye real quick. Just give it a little bit of detail because it looks like it's fairly round. And this is also another way to convey some texture. See that? Boom. Give it a little bit of texture. And that's why I wanted to show you guys this, is because your Monozoa erasers, your erasers are just as powerful as your charcoal in many instances. So, all right, time for the beak. So now here I'm just going to run a nice defined line along here, all the way, one fluid motion there. There we are. That looks nice. That turned out. And then we'll start on the lower beak here. Same thing. Start from the line all the way back to the wattle. There we are. That looks good. And now if we look here, it looks like we have some feathers coming off the bottom of the chicken's beak. So this is how we convey those. We just pull down and then pull up, pull down and up. And that gives us kind of a good idea of where the body of those feathers will be. Now I'm going to load up my brush, just like we did with the comb of the chicken. We're going to focus on those dark values first. Looks like we have dark value in the center where it's folded at the top center, and then I'm going to pull from the side. And remember, this is that initial layer. So we have a ton of smudger work and eraser work coming, but the big part with this step is just making sure that you're identifying those darker values, those lower values first, and then everything else will follow. There we are. There we go, that looks nice. Okay, so now I'm going to take this here. This is our first layer of retrieving those higher values. And this step, it's crucial that you look at the detail work that you want to convey. Which way is that wattle? Like, how is it hanging? What is closer to the viewer's eye? What is farther away? And this will help you when it comes to your eraser work to really convey that underlying form. Remember what I always say, underlying form is one of the hardest things to convey. Texture is hard as well, but underlying form is paramount. So just keep that in mind. So now we're just going to go ahead and we're going to hit that with our brush real quick. And now we're going to take our smudger, because we want a little bit more control. We're going in and we're just pushing the charcoal into the paper in areas where it needs it. That's all we're doing here. Remember, the smudger gives us a little bit more control than the brush does. And here I want to run that smudger right along that line, because all of a sudden this looks like it's rounded, right? And that's what we want. We want it to look rounded. We want it to look three-dimensional. We want to fool the viewer into thinking that they could reach out and grab this bird. And then here, if you notice, there's some creases in the wattle. Well, this is a way that you can do it. You just take your smudger, you press a little harder, and you just run it back and forth. All of a sudden, you have a nice crease in the skin of the wattle. Now here what we're going to do is we're going to go back through again with our Mono-Zero eraser, and we're just going to highlight what we just put down with our smudger. And this is why I say, guys, don't ever be afraid. Like just because if you need to convey more detail, then do another layer. Throw another layer of charcoal. Hit it again with another layer of retrieving higher tones. Just trust yourself. That's all you got to do. And then here what I'm doing is I'm just taking my smudger and I'm just beefing up the left wattle that's sitting behind the right wattle of this chicken. Now here while I'm at it, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to start kind of conveying that three-dimensional form of this bird's beak. It's very light. There's a lot of light hitting this bird's beak, so I don't want to be too aggressive with my charcoal, but I want to put just enough down with my smudger. And one of the reasons why I'm using my smudger for the beak versus the brush is because I want more control. Now that I have put that down and solidified the key points where I need to have those lower values, now I can go and hit it with a brush. This gives us a nice gradation, especially on smooth surfaces, you know, like horns, beaks, you know, antlers, anything like that. But now here I'm just gonna load up my brush and kind of darken up this chicken's wattle here. Darken up any parts on the beak that need it. And if this beak looks a little overworked, don't worry about that, because now we're going to go in. First I'm going to clean up the edges here. All this charcoal with my Mono-Zero eraser. There we go. Let's go in and do some slight detail work. But then here's, check this out, see this? You have just as much power with your eraser as you do with your charcoal pencil, or your smudger, or your brush. And hopefully, by watching this video, you can start to see what kind of techniques and how much detail and what kind of detail you can convey with your eraser. There we go. So now this line has kind of disappeared, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to beef it up with my medium charcoal. And essentially what this is doing is this is bringing that right wattle forward while at the same time pushing the left wattle back. See that? There we go. Yeah, I like that much more. That is much better. I'm just going to go in and just darken this up a little bit. There we go. That looks good. Put a little defined line here. And I'm going to put another defined line right here. Sweet. And then this beak's kind of lost, so I want to bring that lower beak out. Just like this. Nice. That does look better. But here, I hope you guys are starting to see that it's just layer after layer after layer. And then here what I'm doing is, if you look, there's a lot of like rough texture on these wattles. And so here with the medium charcoal, because it holds a lower value, I'm able to go in and essentially just, I'm highlighting everything that I laid down before. There we go. This is looking good. See how it just kind of, it brings it all together. Just a little bit of grittiness in the right place. It really depends on the texture that you're going for. But this looks really good. And if it's too gritty, remember, you can always go back through, hit it with a brush, hit it with a smudger. If it's a smaller area in your drawing and you're like, oh man, I don't want to hit that with my brush, just grab like a 3/16 or a number 1 smudger, and you can go in and really hit it, and you hit it once, get in, get out, and you're golden. But then here with the feathers, I'm just going in and kind of solidifying those, and darkening up wherever it needs to be darkened up. Making this a little darker as well, giving it a little lower value. And here, let's hit this real quick with the brush. Real light, real light. Like I said, we don't want to. You can hit your detail a little bit too hard, and you can smudge and get rid of all your detail that you just built up. But here, I'm just going through and just running my brush along the edge, and this is making it look rounded, and that's really what we want. Just kind of blend this all together. This is giving us a nice gradation. And now I'm just going to take my Mono Zero eraser. I'm just going to clean this up. Tuck that back against that line there. There we go. So now here this line kind of disappeared as well, so I'm just going to go ahead and just pull this one fluid motion. There we go. That looks good. And there's some more detail work right up above the nostril here. And then check this out. So this is a spot where I had left a little bit of feathers to come forward, but when I looked at the reference image again, those feathers actually need to be pushed farther back towards the eye. So I'm going to go through and I'm just going to erase this medium weight line that I laid down with my medium charcoal. And now I'm going to go with my smudger, and I'm just going to lightly tap the paper, and this is going to bring that same texture that we have on the rest of the comb of this chicken, and we're going to bring it over. And then this is literally why I love the 3-layered method, is because if you have something that needs to be fixed, I mean, look at that. That was a quick fix. I fixed that in under a minute. So just keep that in mind. If there's proportion errors or other mistakes that you may have made in your drawing, with the 3-layered method, you can fix almost anything. Okay, this is looking pretty good. Pretty good. Looks like there's some dirt and grime around the bird's nostril here. Let's go ahead and clean that up. But this is one of those drawings where, I mean, you guys, you can spend a long time on it, but remember, with this technique, the longer you spend on it, the more you work the charcoal, the more alive your drawing will become. So that is pretty much it for this one, guys. I hope you got some value out of it. Remember, we do have a Patreon. I am offering monthly drawing consultations for $10 a month, and I'm offering early access to all of our videos for $5 a month, and you get poll voting for $2 a month. We'd really appreciate your support there. It does nothing but help Messer Creations grow and enable us to create more content for you guys. So, and in the latest news, we are on Skillshare now. We're basically creating exclusive drawing tutorial content that's a little bit more in depth, it's a little longer in duration, and it's exclusive to Skillshare. So check us out there. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. Good luck in your future drawings.